Welcome to my first convention review. In this series, I'm going to be reviewing conventions I exhibit at based on my experience as a vendor. Today's target is Supanova Melbourne 2022. Supanova in general is pretty standard when it comes to applying, so I'm going to start with the first strange thing that happened. When the floor plan was released, it was made very clear that the artist alley wasn't in the tent or the same hall as the licensed exhibitors, rather a building that I know Supanova has used in the past, but I could not tell you what for, the Boulevard Pavilion. I wasn't familiar with this building and didn't know what to expect, but given that 2021 was the best Supanova I'd exhibited at as of March 2022, I wasn't getting my hopes up about it. The next strange thing happened on the Wednesday before the event. I received 3 passes via email from MoshTix, the ticketing company in charge of Supanova's passes. They'd never done this, and only half my allocated tickets were included. I attempted to contact Supanova to sort this out, but when I tried to submit an exhibitor's inquiry, I was hit with this message: allow me to read the relevant parts. Exhibitor passes are not sent out prior to the event. They can be collected at the exhibitor check-in desk when you arrive for bump-in at the event. Well, that certainly threw a spanner in the works. Given that I'd be leaving for the event in 2 days anyway, I decided to deal with the issue when I arrived, knowing that Supanova has long response times and that I wasn't likely to hear back from them via email before the event anyway. I will say, there's been multiple times that I would love to be able to call Supanova, but they don't have accessible phone numbers anywhere. Not to my knowledge anyway. They've called me before though, so what the hell, Supanova? When I arrived on Friday, I was pained to see that our 2 tables had a wall divider between them, something we assumed would be removed considering we booked 2 tables, and I started on my quest to fix the 2 issues that had already arisen. Every single Melbourne Supanova, I end up doing laps of the showgrounds to fix issues that shouldn't have happened in the first place, and 2022 was no exception. I was sent by the staff at the alley entrance to ExpoNet to have the divider removed, and told at every stage of the process that if it was a load-bearing half wall that it would have to stay up. I don't know how the alley walls are put up, but I can't imagine a half-meter piece of wood can bear much of a load. At the time, I didn't know what ExpoNet was, so I went to exhibitor services, walking across the showgrounds in 30-degree heat. Luckily, the staff at exhibitor services were able to help me somewhat, pointing me to ExpoNet. Credit where it's due, the ExpoNet guys were helpful and said they'd have the wall taken down in half an hour. Fantastic. I went back to exhibitor services to ask about my missing passes, and they told me I had to find Mitch. This is the second time Supanova staff have told me to find a man and given me a physical description, but not a place or directions. I understand that it can be hard to track people down during bump-in, but the showgrounds are big and I'm not about to go running around looking for a man with a beard in high vis. Everyone is in high vis during bump-in. Anyway, the difference this time was that one of the exhibitor services staff said they were heading over to the artist alley and that if I bumped into them, they'd help me find Mitch. So that's 2 people whose physical properties I needed to commit to memory. We did find Mitch and I got the passes, but not before he mentioned that it was a clerical error with MoshTix and had happened to a number of exhibitors. It seemed to be the last thing he wanted to worry about, but unfortunately for him, it was the first thing I needed to worry about. By the time I got back to the table, one of the ExpoNet guys showed up to remove the half wall, which I assumed would just pop out, but the poor guy had to ask me to take a bunch of stuff off the wall so he could swing the strut 90 degrees to get the drill into the screws. He even commented that the half walls were put in badly and that the method they used was extremely inconvenient. Go team. I'd spent nearly the first hour of being at the showgrounds running around after people, so when I actually stayed at the table to help out, I quickly learned just how painfully hot it was in that building. There were 2 doors open, a roller door on one side for exhibitors to enter from the car park and another door out to the showgrounds. Like I mentioned, it was 30 degrees and that glorified tent got hot. Whenever I leaned down to get something out of a suitcase, I had waterfalls of sweat pouring off my face. Eventually they opened another roller door to let a breeze in, but at that point it was nearly mid-afternoon and the hottest part of the day. Too little too late, y'all. That said, we knew that if they didn't open up more doors to let the breeze in, the heat would be trapped inside and turn the place into a greenhouse. There was rain forecasted for both days of the weekend, so it was going to be humid either way, but the genuine fear that we'd be roasting while the temperature outside was below 20 wasn't a great thought. Luckily, it wasn't too bad inside on Saturday, but as normal, it did heat up once people started entering. Luckily, they had a few more doors open to let fresh air in on Saturday and Sunday. Overall, the ventilation was pretty bad though, which isn't great considering masks weren't enforced. Well, they were meant to be according to the COVID policies, but at least half of the overall attendees didn't wear masks inside. When the gates opened and attendees started filing through, the Boulevard Pavilion heated up incredibly fast. The ventilation in there is terrible and it got so hot despite the cool change, we had to take our masks off to breathe properly. We learned very quickly that we had to dress for weather about 10 degrees hotter than the forecast because there was no airflow through the pavilion at all. Saturday was pretty standard with consistent foot traffic that picked up after lunch. I think having the exhibitors hall and artist alley closer together encouraged people to see both, instead of deciding to skip the alley because it's literally on the other side of the showgrounds. I still hold the opinion that 2021's map was the best, having all vendors in the same building, but I understand that given the amount of booths, they couldn't put them all in the exhibition pavilion again. Only perhaps they could have. The licensed vendors hall was pretty bare bones this year, at least compared to previous years, and I was actually surprised to see a whole lot of not much. Pop culture had a massive display and there was a large raffle booth near the front, but I was able to check out all the stalls in record time thanks to the fact that there just weren't many of them. I'm certainly not complaining, since more licensed vendors means more that we artists have to compete with, but I have to wonder if travel restrictions, the current flood crisis, and general convention hesitancy impacted this. I would have thought those things would hit the artist alley harder, but the alley was suitably more filled out than the vendors hall. Looking at the map, I can't even remember seeing that many booths. It felt like it was half that size. One of the biggest complaints I have about the alley placement is the lack of bathrooms. This was an issue at all Melbournovas up until 2021, with all years before that requiring you to walk to the cafe down the hill or to use the simply disgusting portaloos outside the tent. This year we once again had to walk to the cafe, which caused issues for those with accessibility needs. I'm not the right person to talk about this in depth, but I do have first-hand reports that those in wheelchairs had to be wheeled to the bathrooms because the slopes outside were too steep to get up alone, not to mention the issue of stopping when going downhill. There also weren't any allocated accessible parks for exhibitors. I'm not sure about the general public, but when asked, convention staff didn't seem to care about the fact that there weren't any accessibility allocations. I'm not sure if that's on the convention or the showgrounds, but it's something I wanted to bring up because it's something I see dismissed over and over again. Sunday was strangely busy, and a lot of people I spoke to put that down to the celebrity guests appearing for that day. I don't often look at the guests appearing at conventions, since unless someone brings in Hatsune Miku, I simply don't care. But Christopher Eccleston of Doctor Who fame was a Sunday-only guest that would have brought in a lot of attendees. In a strange turn of events, Sunday ended up being a fairly lucrative day. Typically Sundays are quieter in both traffic and sales, so it was nice to have something a bit new. I spoke to a lot of Artist Alley exhibitors, and it seemed like in general most of us had a similar experience of a strangely slow but still decent convention. One thing I did pick up on though was how placement really screwed over a significant number of artists. We got extremely lucky with our placement this year, being directly down from the entrance and in the middle of the hall. We had consistent traffic throughout the whole weekend, but I'd like to talk about some areas I heard different stories from. Firstly, the far wall. These artists were facing the wall of the building, since for some reason there weren't tables placed along there to create a full aisle. This made the area look very barren, and when I walked along there, I saw a lot of people sitting against the wall, organising their bags, and generally bulking up the walkway. This isn't a good look and would have impacted the artists along there. I heard it wasn't too bad and the tables here still got a decent amount of traffic, but from what I've gathered, the very back corner near the exit was hit the hardest. And by hit, I mean completely missed. I spoke with someone who was shoved right into the corner and they said it had been extremely quiet, despite the fact that they could see attendees further down the aisle. I think this partly has to do with the door being in the middle of the aisle, splitting the tables into two distinct sections, meaning people would probably glance down to the end and leave if nothing caught their eye. I think this may have been remedied slightly by a change Supanova made at some point in the convention. I can't pinpoint exactly when this happened, but one of my table helpers reported that the event had started funneling people out of the convention through the artist alley. This meant that to get to the train station and car park, you had to walk past at least the first half of the alley, in a decision that I would like to give Supanova a huge amount of credit for. Because Sunday had been consistently busy, we didn't notice a distinct change, but I can safely attribute the guests for the day and the change in customer flow to the unexpected amount of traffic. While a lot of people would have gone through the alley without stopping, there would have been a non-zero amount of attendees stopping to buy things on their way out. Is this change a bit inconvenient for attendees? Yes. Was it a massive boost for the artist alley and brought unexpected sales? Absolutely. Attendees being slightly inconvenienced is a small price to pay for artists getting a boost in sales. Those tables aren't cheap, you know. The last thing I'd like to cover is the parking management. This might seem like a boring topic, but trust me when I say this was the best car park organisation Super has had in a long time. Exhibitors used the standard dirt and shed area near the exhibitors pavilion, but the artist alley got to park right next to the entry door and were allocated the closest rows of parks to minimise the distance between car and table. There were signs up to specify that it was staff parking, and the car park staff did a great job of directing everyone clearly and quickly. I've always appreciated that Supanova provides exhibitor parking, but this was the best it's ever been. Overall, Supanova Melbourne 2022 was a good event. The lack of ventilation and distance to bathrooms wasn't great, but points for incredible parking organisation and customer flow management. It wasn't our best performing Melbournova, but as far as I'm concerned, nothing will beat 2021.